and welcome to Brussels, my love, our weekly talk show from the heart of Europe, where we break down the highs and lows of EU policymaking. I'm Stefan Grobe. Thank you for tuning in. Coming up this week, what happened at the White House didn't stay at the White House. The made-for-TV clash between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky left America's allies in Europe stunned. Never before has there been such a public display of disdain and distrust between allies and partners. The minerals deal that was supposed to be signed in Washington is now up in the air, as is the future commitment of the United States to supporting Ukraine. And the disaster in the Oval Office left European leaders scrambling for answers. One option is a massive ramp-up of military spending to support Ukraine and defend Europe alone, in case Trump and Elon Musk decide to unceremoniously withdraw US troops from the continent. To fill this void, the British Prime Minister even suggested a coalition of the willing to protect Ukraine and a peace agreement with Russia that may or may not come. Where is all this going? The perfect question for our guests today. Ville Niinistö, member of the European Parliament for the Greens from Finland, Shahda Islam, independent analyst and commentator on European affairs from Belgium, and Giuseppe Spatafora, research analyst at the EU Institute for Security Studies. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
But before we get started, let's take a look at the dramatic days we all witnessed that could shape the future in Europe.
What has become a brutal war of attrition has suddenly received a new focus. After 3 years of fighting, a negotiated peace between Russia and Ukraine seems to be taking center stage. But peace at what price? Donald Trump's brutal smackdown of Volodymyr Zelensky raises more questions than it offers perspectives.
You gotta be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
Will the United States abandon Ukraine? How far is Trump willing to go to placate Vladimir Putin? And could Ukraine afford to keep on fighting only with support from Europe? Meanwhile, Western allies are making dramatic efforts to mend ties with Washington. This week, Trump first seemed to keep the door open, but then froze military aid for Ukraine. And Zelensky first delivered an olive branch of sorts by thanking America profusely. You can almost hear the champagne bottles popping in the Kremlin. Is Putin about to win this war?
That was quite a week. Before we answer that question, I'd like to come back to that infamous clash in the White House. How did you see that moment and what went through your mind? Shahda, I'll start with you.
I hate bullies. This was bullying at an epic scale. You know, it was humiliating, degrading, and actually unnecessary. So frankly, I was watching that and my heart was sinking, thinking, which kind of world are we entering? Bully instead of diplomacy? What is happening to us?
Yeah, Giuseppe?
It is true that indeed it was unprecedented on so many levels. There were questions about whether Zelensky could have done it differently, but it is really hard. You know, if he had done something like Macron, pushing over and taking Trump's finger and fact-checking him, I don't know if it would have been right, because Macron is able to do it because of his personal relationship. But for Ukraine, clearly Zelensky was there. Perhaps there was a trap, a setup. It was really tough for Zelensky to do anything like that. So it was really risky as an environment.
So is the relationship between Trump and Ukraine now totally shattered, or can it still be repaired?
Well, this was very disheartening, and I agree that it was bullying actions by Trump and J.D. Vance. I think there are two ways of interpreting it. Either they set a trap to Zelensky on a purpose to give them a chance to withdraw support from Ukraine, or then, you know, J.D. Vance especially acted in a way where you can also interpret it as 40 minutes had passed in the discussion. Zelensky managed 40 minutes of that weird discussion, and then in the end J.D. Vance had this cultural war kind of attitude against Zelensky, where he had no choice than to uphold his country's position that they are being brutally attacked and they have to protect their integrity and their sovereignty. It was not about how they should relate to US. It was about how one should relate to Putin. And this is the big problem with Donald Trump's policy. Trump has a tendency of making deals in a way where his mentality is that of an imperial authoritarian. And that's the big question mark for Europe and Ukraine. Can you really trust on Trump actually supporting Ukraine in the future if he has a similar mentality than Putin?
So Trump is a transactional figure. And also he bases his actions on personal relationship. You mentioned Macron. Shada, I wonder, and Trump hates Zelensky since his first term. Would things be different today if there were somebody else at the helm of Ukraine other than Zelensky?
Well, that is a moot point. Obviously, there is personal acrimony there, there's history there. But I think we should move beyond this specific event, as it were, this incident, and look at the deep structural changes that are taking place. And America, which, as you've said, has become transactional, and, an America that is withdrawing not just from Europe, but in a way from the world, which, the president that is making deals based on his business interests, and the whole sort of geopolitical landscape is changing as we talk. This has major implications for the multipolar world which we live in at the moment. The Western leadership that we've counted on in so many ways, including in development aid, peacekeeping troops. I mean, all of those issues we have to rethink. And I think Europe is basically in the firing line because the transatlantic relationship has been such a bedrock of our own identity and the way we've sort of conducted our affairs as Europeans. We've relied on the US. For me, this is not just a wake-up call. This is a major wake-up call. We should all be sitting up and really changing the way we think and act.
But the question remains, and you said it's certainly moot to speculate about Zelensky's future, but there were some voices in the US from the Republican Party that putting pressure on Zelensky to step down.
Indeed.
Is this at the end, and he suggested something like...
in exchange for peace, I'm ready to step. In exchange for the future of Ukraine being in the right hands and protected, I'm happy to step down. Absolutely. The thing is that there are people such as Lindsey Graham who had been at Munich Security Conference and had said, "Oh, look, you are the perfect ally." And then now, after the spat, he said, "Well, Zelensky is ungrateful and he should resign." This indicates that within the Republican Party, at this moment, there is little to no opposition to Trump. Trump can do what he wants, and people realize that if they want to stay in power in business, they will need to do what Trump says. Now, to the point of whether without Zelensky it would be different, it's probably possibly true, but the problem is that that's what the Russians want. Even the Russians had said as part of the first ceasefire plans or draft that have circulated, the Russians want elections before a deal is signed, and that's obvious. We know why, because with an election, especially in a country at war, the Russians would have many ways to influence that election in order to put in place somebody who's much closer to them and would be more willing to take different positions and an accord that is much closer to them. So that's Russian playbook.
Mm-hmm. Right. Really, this minerals deal that Trump has come up with, will it still be signed, and who will benefit most of it?
Well, I think it's interesting also. It shows that Trump has this mentality that in order to support Ukraine, he wants something in return. So he's not protecting values, he's not protecting democracy or NATO's position or European national sovereignty. That's not his mentality, and we see it also in the US siding with Russia on votes, which unprecedented in these circumstances. So I think what Zelensky thought is that if they do sign this agreement, they have some kind of a window where cooperation with the US can continue. They can get military support. By signing this agreement, the Americans would have an interest in having a post-war Ukraine which is free and able to take in American investment, and also the Americans would gain from that. So that is the logic for Zelensky, but at the same time you have to be careful about what kind of deals you sign, that you don't give over your national resources to the US government, because the Ukrainians don't want that either.
Isn't that a kind of catch-22 situation also for the Americans, Shara? Trump says, well, the fact that US mining operations are going on is a security guarantee. Now, the US mining companies say, we're not doing this without security guarantees, because, setting up a new mine takes years, could be up to 10 years. years.
A business venture is not a security guarantee.
Right. So what about this? Who should give these security guarantees then? Is it the companies, the mining companies?
Well, ultimately, it'll have to be the American administration. It will have to be the American security forces. That is what ultimately happens when you say, you know, this is in exchange for security guarantees. It is not going to be the business companies, the entrepreneurs doing it, which is where I think the European presence that we've been talking about, the boots on the ground from the Europeans, this 30,000 strong troop deployment that France and Britain have sort of put on the table. I think that's where this could become important, because it takes it away from the American focus and brings in the real issues of security guarantees for Ukraine once peace is declared. So I'm a bit confused about what's going to be done. But I do agree with Ville that, you know, this is meant to be a win-win situation for Ukraine, which gets the investments and the security guarantees, and America gets access to very precious minerals that it needs for its tech competition with China, among others.
Right. Giuseppe.
Well, first of all, one problem about indeed setting up is the cost. We talked about it before. The other problem is that most of those minerals are in the east of Ukraine. Right, they're in the area that is closest to the front line. So paradoxically, that should be an incentive for Trump and others to say Ukraine should get as much of the territory back as possible. Now, this is not what is coming out of these negotiations, as much as we can tell. What we can hear is something that is very close to the Russian line, and is really a paradox that the U.S. is doing that, unless you want to see the perspective of Trump as one of somebody wants something quick, something for domestic purpose, something that potentially people say could win him the Nobel Prize. Perhaps there's always that, but the point is that it's not an agreement so far that is signed up in order to achieve sustainable peace, but it's something to give Trump something quick to win. And for the Europeans, it is important to be there. At the same time, the problem is that, and Macron and Starmer have said it, this may not work without a U.S. backstop behind it. So that's always bringing in the Americans.
There is, of course, the problem of security guarantees for Ukraine is one thing, but if we take it a step further, it's the entire future of NATO that is at stake here. And it is, of course, in Washington's foreign policy establishment, as in Europe, the specter of a NATO without the United States is circulating. Someone who sharply rejects this idea is NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, of all people. At the Crisis Summit in London, he said the following. Take a listen.
I've spoken many times with President Trump. He's a good friend. We worked now for 8 years together. So 4 years when he was president first time. And we stayed in touch when he was out of the presidency. And of course, we have now re-engaged very actively again. And he is totally committed, as he said many times, to Article 5, to NATO. So please, let's stop gossiping about what the US might or might not do. They are in NATO, they are committed to NATO, they're committed to Article 5. This is what they consistently say, including Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, the President himself and others.
Really, you can't be clearer than Rutte at this point. But is he right? Are we just gossiping here? I mean, Elon Musk said the US should leave NATO, right?
Well, I think Rutte has no other position than to say precisely what he's saying. That's what he's supposed.
A good friend of mine.
He's supposed to say that, and it's also eases Trump. So I understand that those who are presidents or secretaries generals of NATO, they like to try to appease Trump, because if they get personal feuds, everything will get worse. I understand that. But at the same time, we who are not presidents, we can say aloud that American commitment to NATO is at its lowest point in NATO history. We can't have full guarantees that the administration of Trump, looking at the project 2025, what are their policy goals internally, what are their policy goals in foreign policy, we can't have any guarantees that they will support Europe in a time of crisis. They might, but they might they might want something in for exchange, and that's a big difference from the past. And you see, one person is very quiet in the current situation of escalation, and that's Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin is only quiet when things are moving to his direction.
It's wishful thinking, isn't it? It's really wishful thinking on the part of Mark Rutte. I know that, as you said, Ville, this is to appease, but I think European leaders are playing sort of double different kind of games. You go there and you try and appease him. You bring a letter from King Charles. You put your hand on his arms and his thighs and the rest of it, and you're friendly. But I think you need to be respect. You need to get respect. I think bullies, in my experience, bullies like people who stand up for themselves and who are brave enough to speak truth to power. And I'm not sure all this dilly-dallying is actually going to get us somewhere. Look, the US administration previously as well has always been saying to Europe, put up your defense spending, take up more responsibility within NATO. What Trump is doing is just accelerating and being more, let's say, rude about it, more harsh about it, like J.D. Vance was at the Munich Security Conference. We have to listen to this. I think some of us are. I think Emmanuel Macron is quite sort of determined to move ahead with this, his strategic autonomy. But others sort of, once again, wishy-washy, one step back. The fact is that Europeans are not united on this issue. They don't have a united front vis-a-vis Russia. We know that. And when it comes to Donald Trump, once again, we're fighting, squabbling amongst ourselves.
Yeah. Giuseppe, the US has not drawn up a specific list of demands for peace negotiations. Will Trump pressure Ukraine to give up territories in the east to move forward?
Almost surely. The territories that are under Ukrainian Russian occupation right now, they're most likely gone, at least according to this current framework. It's unlikely to bring those back, and that's true even without negotiations, because the Ukrainians have been trying to get those back, and militarily this has been very difficult. The problem is that, in addition, Putin has annexed 4 provinces of Ukraine, not all of which are under Russian control, but are under Russian law part of Russia. So all 4 parts, only Luhansk is the only province that is almost fully under Russian control. So the problem there could be that Putin could say all those provinces are mine, and this is the starting point. Plus, there's the other thing that Russia tends to put very harsh demands at the beginning. And there is right now no incentive for Russia to not do those demands. The demands are basically the same that were in place before the war started. Yeah. The Ukraine's government has to change, that Ukraine has to be neutral, and even that US forces should move away from the eastern part of the alliance. That's the biggest paradox, and I see Finland or Finnish members of parliament right now, because all those countries that are next in line are also the ones that are spending the most on defense. So paradoxically, they are the US closest allies in the sense of Trump's, if you only measure alliance by how much you spend on defense, but they would be the one that are ready to suffer the biggest consequences if Putin gets what he wants.
Yeah. Billy, before I come to you, I'm going to sum up this discussion here. So the US is switching sides in the Ukrainian war. The continued US troop presence in Europe is suddenly uncertain, as is the future of NATO. None of this is inspiring confidence among citizens in Europe. So how do people view the latest developments between war and peace? We've asked around on the streets of Brussels, and this is what we found out.
I think Trump, it's good with words, but not reaction.
I'm very sad because everybody needs to work together. We want peace. Everybody wants peace. So I hope that everybody will talk, find a solution. It's very worrying.
Okay, now the big heat might be on Ukraine, but tomorrow it's us, and then so on. So where does it stop? So of course I'm worried and concerned, and however, it's bad.
This is going to wake European politicians and leaders up to show more united fronts. I don't know if I'd necessarily be scared, because I don't like to live in fear, and I'd prefer to remain positive and just think that despite Trump mentioning a World War III, I don't think anybody really wants to go in that direction.
So obviously there's no panic, but a certain unease. People are a little worried. What are you hearing in Finland?
Well, I think people want determined action by European leaders and joint front. Finland is a country with 1,300 kilometers of border with Russia. We've had wars and skirmishes with Russia for 1,000 years, if you count Novgorod in. So that's about 60 wars or skirmishes.
We will do that, yeah.
so that we have a history of that. So we look at this differently than some of our Western European colleagues. So what we want to achieve in the European Parliament and what our state leaders should achieve is the realization that European military capabilities have to compensate for the lesser American presence in Europe in a way that Russia also understands that their threat is negated. Putin's plan is to get a ceasefire in Ukraine for Trump to lift sanctions in order for him to get more money for his war economy. He doesn't stop in Ukraine, so he would continue after the ceasefire to push Ukraine maybe into another war, or somebody else, Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, or even we as bordering nations would be there. He doesn't have the money. I mean, Russia is losing. They don't have liquid money left. They've almost all of their assets have been used that are not frozen. So he would need to increase taxes in the next half year to finance the war in Ukraine. So what Putin is now wanting is that Trump is giving him a lifeline to get more money for his war economy, and then he would build up on it. Okay. So what we have to do is not allow that.
I want to finish this round with Shara. So far, the European public has been squarely behind Ukraine, but now with far-right pro-Moscow parties gaining influence in Europe, is this going to change? Is this going to change?
There is that danger, I think, because misinformation from the far right is very strong on these issues. People also, frankly, I think authentically, genuinely want peace. It's not very nice. It's not very pleasant to live in a state of war, constant unease and war and adversarial relations with our neighbors, So I think people genuinely want peace, but it has to be on the right terms. And I think if this is explained in a lucid manner to our public, they will be understanding all the things that Ville has talked about, Giuseppe have talked about. We are in a moment existentially very, very difficult.
Good. We'll keep that in mind. That's all we have time for this round. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, disgrace in Washington, decisions in London and Brussels. How Europe assumes risk and responsibility. Stay with us. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. Our guests are still Shara Islam, Giuseppe Spatafora and Ville Niinistö. Europe may well be on its own when it comes to supporting Ukraine in the future. However, the participants at the London summit proved to Trump that they, too, can create facts that will influence the final settlement of the war. First, more military support for Ukraine. Second, no demilitarization of Ukraine after the end of the conflict. And third, security guarantees from European forces behind Ukrainian lines. Can such a concept work, and could it impress Trump, Giuseppe?
It's necessary, absolutely, because the alternative is nothing. The alternative is the US withdraws and potentially even there is no peace. And I still don't know when you can get Putin to the table. Yeah. But it is essential to keep Ukraine as a strong independent nation with a westward orientation. And you can only do that by ensuring that there's no future attack on Ukraine again, or if there is, that Ukraine is able to defend itself. And obviously that depends also on us, on what we can do. It doesn't mean a lot of troops, 30,000, it sounds like a large number, but we can do so much more than that. Yeah. But that is enough because Ukraine itself has a strong base and it needs just some support.
There has been a lot of activity in this town this week. The EU Commission has proposed a new joint borrowing of 150 billion euros to lend to EU governments for defense as part of an overall 800 billion euro financing effort. Is that the right way forward, and is it enough?
It's unprecedented. I mean, for the EU to come out with this rearm project, to finance defense spending, we're moving in a different direction from which we've been used to, right? Mm-hmm. We haven't been known for our military defense assets, have we? So I think this is an unprecedented step. Now, the issue for me really is, how do you explain this to the public? A public which is complaining about the rising cost of living, which is complaining about housing, social justice, the cohesion funds that may be used for defense spending. So there is a lot of, I think, political capital at stake here. And I'm also wondering in terms of how we actually manage such huge amounts of money. Who is going to be in charge? Is it the European Commission? Will there be a European Defense Fund, sort of somebody leading that? So I think it's grey territory. It's important narrative. But now the challenge is to walk this talk. Yeah. And not to forget that we also have very different threat perceptions, and not everybody within the 27 EU states agrees on the threat posed by Russia.
That brings me again to Finland. Ville, you're the only politician at the table. How do you explain that to your voters?
Well, I think we will need leadership on a high level here, so that the member countries' leaders would need to show that this is also about protection of our way of life. Seriously, this time our way of life. So democracy, human rights, rule of law, and that we have also this. I mean, Europe is a superpower when it comes to trade. And we can also get allies from outside of Europe in Latin America, Southeast Asia, who are a bit bewildered by what Trump is doing with trade wars and also very worried about Putin's and China's influence. So Europe can use its soft power, but still to use that soft power, we will need hard power. That's the reality of today.
I like that you mentioned leadership. Because on the European side, the United Kingdom seems to have taken the lead in the Ukraine crisis. Let's listen to Prime Minister Keir Starmer last Sunday, the host of the conference at Lancaster House. Here he is.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air, together with others. Europe must do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, the heavy lifting. Giuseppe, I think we can say that the Ukraine crisis has kind of turbocharged UK-EU relations, right? What is in Starmer's interest here? Why is he taking the lead? What is at stake for him?
Well, there's a lot at stake. Obviously, one thing is since Brexit, relations between the UK and the EU have been strained. This is the first government that is not a conservative government after Brexit, so that's clearly a signal that they wanted to do something different. On trade, I know that there's been some difficulties and there continue to be, but on defense, it's where the UK used to be and still is the most powerful country in Europe. Is the one that can take over the leadership from the United States. It is also the one that has taken the initiative of leading the Ramstein format. So it does make sense that UK does that. And in all this, you know, it's interesting that the UK has taken the lead together with France on Ukraine, and then there's going to be, or there will, this week there is this summit on European security. Obviously the UK is out of that, but it will be important to see how the money that the EU puts on the table can be spent on things that include also the UK, because this is about European deterrence. It's not just about deterrence of the EU.
Norway included as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Is Starmer doing this because the governments in France and Germany are so weak domestically right
I think there's a bit of that. I think that's very true. But it's also a very, I would say, very fragile balancing act on his part, isn't he? Because he wants to maintain that special relationship with Donald Trump, J.D. Vance and all the rest of it, you know, the monarchy and, you know, coming, you know, visit by Trump to the UK and all the rest of it, while drawing closer to the EU, which Trump hates. You know, he's called it the enemy, the adversary and all the rest of it. Right. It's a balancing act. I'm not sure how it will go down with voters, and I'm not sure how we're going to here in Europe deal with Britain, which obviously is now seeing as a channel, a conduit to the White House.
Well, I think this is a moment also to mend our relationship with the UK government and the nation in general. So I think there has been talk in the corridors in Brussels, but also in Westminster, that we could even create some kind of a formal partnership between the UK and EU on security and defence. That would be great, because we will need UK on this. We will need a strong European NATO. If US is less reliable, we will need also UK to have a big role there. And I think the conditions that were discussed in this meeting in London are precisely the conditions that need to be, you know, at the table in order for Ukraine to actually get a long-lasting peace. Without this backup from Europe, Ukraine cannot even negotiate a peace.
Giuseppe, very briefly, is the United Kingdom realizing that its future lies with Europe rather than with the US?
Well, I mean, they will keep having the transatlantic relationship as the core as well. They will try to remain this conduit. And I think, yes, it is true that it's important for them to keep both. I think it is, as long as we can keep the United States without it becoming a real problem, it is good. So a deal that has the US behind is always better than one without them.
All right.
But if they are not there, then...
Good. On that point, we can close this conversation. Thank you so much to our guests, and thank you for watching. See you soon here on Euronews. Hello and welcome to Brussels, my love. My guests are Giuseppe Spatafora from the EU Institute for Security Studies, Finnish MEP Ville Niinistö, and EU Affairs Analyst Shada Islam. The Trump administration is currently taking a turn that will shock many by focusing entirely on direct negotiations with Moscow and hinting at peace strategies that are entirely to Russia's liking. A realignment that is not totally surprising given Trump's admiration for authoritarian rulers such as Putin. The question is, are we witnessing the creation of a new geopolitical reality here?
I think we are. I think the stance of the US government is very different. So there is no alliance of the democratic nations anymore. Even, you know, how democratic Trump is questionable. He's doing unconstitutional acts with the efficiency work that they are doing with Elon Musk, which the courts are a mess in US. So I think we will see cultural wars in the US. They will have an effect in Europe, but then also the possible closing of relations between Putin and Trump does create a headache for us.
Yeah, is he taking, Shada, taking a political domestic risk by realigning U.S. policy with Russia? Will the Republican Party follow him blindly here?
I don't know if they follow blindly for always in a sustained manner, but for the moment, he doesn't have any opposition within his own party. And I have to say, the Democrats are pretty silent as well. So I think, you know, that is something new in the U.S. as well. But if I could just come back to what Ville said,
sure.
There is a geopolitical reordering that's underway, and it opens up space for other powers to play a role. And I would want the EU to be among those powers. A united Europe can be, but, you know, we have become a little bit, if I may say so, irrelevant in the world today. The world is watching. We have been totally out of the decisions being taken as regards the Middle East. That was another deal that was done between friends, if you like, a business deal, a Gaza retreat. And we are being accused by many countries, sometimes I think justifiably, about double standards, where we're talking about the rule of law and, you know, all the important thing of the International Court of Justice when it comes to Russia, and we're not doing the same things vis-a-vis Israel. So double standards are there. So I think the EU will have to work very hard convincing countries in this multipolar world where countries have agency that they are really on the side of rule of law and human rights. And I think that is going to be a bit of a challenge.
Is that you mentioned the Democrats, they're kind of silent, as you said. Is this maybe because they think, okay, let's have Trump's second term and then it's over and then we all go back to normal?
Well, let's see. I mean, 4 years, a lot can happen, especially if in 100 days a lot happens. They're definitely doing they're thinking domestically, okay? They're thinking about what is happening, and they have to pick their battles, right? There's so many battles to choose from. They're probably choosing the one that matters the most to American voters. And probably the battle over inflation, for instance, is one, or the fight over immigration or government efficiency.
Women's affairs, women's rights.
Absolutely, all that. So that's foreign policy recedes a little bit in the background. Perhaps it's normal. Perhaps we would do the same here. Of course, here for us, Ukraine is so central to our security that we cannot take it for granted or leave it.
Yeah. I mentioned it already, Trump's admiration for Putin. We found the quote last Friday in which he downright defends Putin and instead has nothing but contempt for his domestic political opponents. An astonishing and, for many, embarrassing document. Take a listen.
Biden, they didn't respect him. They didn't respect Obama. They respect me. Let me tell you, Putin went through a hell of a lot with me. He went through a phony witch hunt where they used him and Russia. You ever hear of that deal? And he had to go through that. And he did go through it. We didn't end up in a war. And he went through it. He was accused of all that stuff. He had nothing to do with it. It came out of Hunter Biden's bedroom. It was disgusting. And then they said, oh, the laptop from hell was made by Russia, the 51 agents. The whole thing was a scam, and he had to put up with that. He was being accused of all that stuff.
Putin went through a lot, and they used him, they, of course, being the Democrats. Not a word about Putin's aggressive foreign policy, about Russian cyber attacks, about repression and the murder and persecution of opponents, even in other European countries. What do you make of this?
I think that's embarrassing for a US leader to speak like that. He looks at everything from a very personal angle. So Putin's actions are reflected through how he acts on issues that are important for Trump, not by Putin's actions against rule of law or aggression in Ukraine or the war economy that they're building, all the war crimes and kidnapping of children and rapes that the Russian troops are doing, bombing civilians. And they didn't only start it in Ukraine, they've done it in Syria, they've done it in Chechnya. So this is long-lasting policy of Vladimir Putin. And if there was a leader of the free world there, it was Zelenskyy, because he was standing up to values. And I think the big question now is this kind of like Russians and Putin have this policy of reflexive control. They try to make their opponents to do pro-Russia action by making it alluring to them and punishing if they don't do it. So in a way, Trump is in the pocket of Putin currently, and that's very disheartening.
And Shada, Putin has not succeeded militarily in Ukraine. He thought the war would be over in a couple of days. Now it's 3 years. So he has, in a way, overextended his political and economic options. And then Trump came back. Is Putin now just waiting for a moment to save his face?
Yeah, it's manna from heaven, isn't it, for him? Manna from heaven. It's a God-sent gift, you know. All he has to do is sit back and watch. And as you said, we haven't heard from him. But there's one thing that really worries me. It's not just 4 years. We're not only going to be facing this kind of America for the next 4 years. This is a long-term, epoch-changing, game-changing situation that we're in. Trump may or may not be elected, but others like him are there. This is a trend, a structural trend that we have to get used to. And, you know, whether Trump can make this peace without Zelenskyy, without Ukraine, without Europeans at the table or not, we'll see. It's a fast-moving world, right? Fast-moving, changing very fast. One day it's yes, the next day it's no. But this change, the structural change that is happening in how America views the world, no longer global policemen, no longer the soft power that people looked at, the military power. This is going to have repercussions across the world.
On that note, thank you very much. Great conclusion. We've reached the end of Brussels, my love. Thank you to our panel here in our studio and to our viewers at home. If you want to continue the conversation on any topic, write to brusselsmylove@euronews.com or contact us on social media. That's it for today. I'm Stefan Grove. Have an excellent week. Take care and see you soon.